words that make men free. By Alma's hand, unholy sorcery, they stole your voice for Nephite tyranny. From hypocrisy, stop to be free. He died for me. Ignite my mind. Dogma consume. Oh, Corior, I'll speak for you. Contrary to law, they bound you for thinking, but without a word, they all debates forfeit. Battle of wits, charlatans unarmed, beguile their sheep with holy bullshit. Ignite my mind from hypocrisy. Start to be free. Die for me. He died. Ignite my mind. Dogma consume. I'll speak for you. To honor their God, they showed you no mercy, turned you away, Mammon's altar to feed. Oh, wicked duress, they broke your solemn mind, crucified you with bread to fuel their heartless greed. Ignite my mind from hypocrisy. Start to be free. He died for me. Ignite my mind. Dogma consume. Oh, Corior, I'll speak for you.
Welcome from the Morador. This is a beautiful Sunday morning, 10 a.m. You horse better have Cora horse money. Anyways, this is Godless Sermon. It is a weekly show that we do at 10 a.m. every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Sometimes we do a linger longer afterwards where we have a separate broadcast. I put that in the description. We found that if we put it into the comments, StreamYard kicks it back or YouTube kicks it back and says, hey, you're spamming. So in any event, it's plausible. It's kind of off the cuff, but we do Sunday mornings kind of lackadaisical after Godless Sermon. So at 11 a.m., it is plausible, been suggested, still very likely that Rene Steelman from the She Became Visible podcast will join me on a separate live, and we're going to talk updates on Mormon True Crime stories. So I think that's going to be fun. It was her idea. But also it's kind of difficult to coordinate last minute. So if she joins us, she does. If not, I'll give you guys some updates on some stories. As a matter of fact, we might do some here in sermon too. This is kind of impromptu. Sometimes my godless sermons are a little more polished, but I felt like this was necessary. Call it spiritual breaking news for godless people, if you will. I did a story earlier this week. Was it only this week? My gosh. About Nick Shirley, a Mormon independent journalist, really a YouTuber, who has been popularized all over the world because of his apparently having revealed or discovered massive amounts, hundreds of millions of dollars of fraud in Minnesota's daycare system. And it turns out with a little investigative journalism, little gumshoe work online, not much, frankly, I was able to demonstrate pretty easily how any critical thinker could show that this guy is peddling some pretty racist tropes over absolutely no founded evidence at all, and that the guy who appears to actually be behind it was actually this man, David, who refuses to go by his actual name. He calls himself David, very sus, who did all the work, and then this kid, Nick, has to go and peddle it because he's this fresh-faced young returned missionary. Well, did some digging, come to find out. No, actually, it turns out Nick comes from some pretty shady background that most people, I think, out here would consider normal. Here being Utah. I don't know if you know this, but most of you probably not. Utah is pretty much the fraud capital of the world. The fraud is happening all day, every day here. And when I found out the truth about Nick Shirley's past, which I'm still trying to validate and verify that this is the right Nick Shirley and that his past, this is the right past, it started to click together with a little too much familiarity, a little too much of, I see what's going on here. Okay. But in any event, this is the thing. Nick Shirley's not responsible for what his parents did. It is plausible that apparently Nick Shirley's parents owned a software company that managed payments for gym memberships. Right away, for me, I'm sorry to tell you this. I'm just going to come out with this. Like, I'm just going to say it bluntly, okay? I come from an MLM background, and even I went, ew, gym memberships, gross. But okay, they have to make money some way. Turns out it may have been a front for a kind of real estate investment scam. So, in any event, there appears to be impropriety there. I'm still validating all of the things about it. But as I began talking about this subject this week, both on TikTok and on here, I felt it necessary again and again to come up. It comes up again and again. All these Mormon podcasters out here, especially Latter-day Daily Saints, I'm calling them out directly, and now and Quick Media, and also now he's expanding into other podcasts, including the Valuetainment Show by Patrick Bet David. There's a guy. I mean, look, you're not responsible. Nick isn't responsible for who else Patrick Bet David has on his show. And look, everybody interviews people from a wide variety of backgrounds, and so forth. But I think it worthy to note, going on Patrick Bet David's podcast, you should always remember that he also once had Richard Spencer, the neo-Nazi, on there to come up and defend positions, his positions on things. Patrick Bet David himself is an Iranian Christian refugee. His family fled Iran, I believe, after the takeover by the Ayatollah. Don't know much about him except that he's a hard conservative who owns a kind of MLM style finance company that uses MLM to model to go out and basically in the MLM world, which again, I've worked with MLM companies for 20 plus years. And I can tell you, even in the MLM world, which can get shady as hell, these companies they're a dime a dozen and they're pretty sus. But in any event, he is very popular. His show is very popular. But every time that this Nick Shirley guy goes on, gets platformed by these Mormon podcasters or conservative podcasters, which apparently now includes J.D. Vance, whatever, he winds up having to defend himself as saying, I'm not a racist. Or he winds up somebody else defending him saying, he's not racist. It's not racist to say racist things, basically. And because this is about culture, they'll say, as if if you say things that marginalize a group of people, it's racist. And it doesn't matter that you didn't say it in a racist sounding way in your mind. The wording is not important. The implication is there. The wording, you might as well just come out and say it. You might as well come out and say it bluntly in the most racist terminology that you can, because the words are irrelevant as long as the impression that you're leaving is to validate what people who marginalized communities from a position of privilege are saying about them. Now, I tell you that story to tell you another story and hopefully get off of this subject for a bit, because it gives me the ick to talk about this guy. And his background is my background. I come from Mormon ancestors. I come from Mormon culture. I was like Nick. I was once a missionary in South America. He was apparently 2 years ago a missionary in Chile, Santiago, which is very near to my mission 25 years ago in the Peru-Lima North Mission for the Mormon Church back in the days when I was a Christian man. And yes, Mormons are Christians, deal with it. And for me, it has been a long journey to accept this, that to forgive our ancestors of racism, which in Mormon culture is rampant and common, is not to forgive the racism itself. The racism and the hatred of marginalized people because of their race is too commonplace in American society. It's too commonplace in every society, frankly. I saw a lot of it in South America, I can tell you that. South America, you meet racist people everywhere you go. But it's so commonplace that we cannot actually take responsibility for our ancestors' racism. Our ancestors' racism, their behavior dies with them. But because they can't make new choices, they cannot choose to accept that I only believe this about somebody else because I was taught that, or that I only believe that because I feel weak or insecure. And so it makes me feel better to otherize somebody else and put something off on them. But then then people go out there and they make defensive arguments for racism, and they try to excuse it and say, well, this isn't excusing this, but then they do it. So the words themselves, it's not a question of whether or not you use the wrong words. It's not a question of whether or not you use racial slurs while you're saying it. That's not what makes it racist. And then there's this misconception in white society, in America especially, and especially in white conservative society, that says it's only racist if it devalues somebody because of their skin color. And it's too convenient. I'm sorry to tell you. that is a white supremacist cover. That it's about the color of your skin only, and it's about value and asking about the value, which is really just a tie-in they now use to try and tie racism into their fight, into conservatives' fight for pro-life, to say, well, all human beings have value, and then they try and tack on a very racist argument that says that abortion rights have to do with white people trying to eliminate people of color, and which is not true. I mean, there are certainly racist people on the pro-choice movement, because if you put Americans in the mix anywhere, you're going to get racist people. And we are a society that has been dominated by white supremacy. And just because people say, well, that's not how I define it, doesn't change the fact that that's the way it's been. When you marginalize people, not just because of the color of their skin, but because of their ethnic group, because of their ethnic background, and you reinforce tropes about those people. They are shifty, they are dirty, they are this, they are that, they bring disease, they bring crime, they bring blah, 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 blah. They come from a culture that is barbaric, savage, any of these other words that you can look at and say, that people look at and say, look, that's just factual. That's just a fact about those people. You're talking about reinforcing the marginalization of marginalized groups. That's white supremacy. That's racism in this country. And we don't have to own it. Now, we cannot forgive our ancestors, our histories, the racism itself, and then tell ourselves that we are not racist. But that doesn't mean that we have to be hateful towards our ancestors. We can accept that this was bad, this was evil, and it's something that my ancestors did because they didn't know better. It's something that they did because they were in a moment of weakness and had to blame somebody else in order to make themselves feel better. It's something that they did because they were taught it by other people, or maybe it's something they did because they were just hateful people. And it is entirely plausible to blame them and be angry at them and say whatever you need to say because of how you feel about that. But it also is possible to say, I don't excuse what they did, but I do still love them for the things that they did that had nothing to do with that. And I still appreciate the heritage that I got from them that had nothing to do with that. And people all over the country, this is a spiritual wound in America. There are people who had ancestors who fought for the Confederacy, who can respect and guard the heritage of saying my ancestors stood up for what they believed in, or whether that be constitutionality or states' rights or what have you, and still be able to say they also fought for slavery to keep the right to own people, and that was wrong. And it's entirely possible to do. And in fact, I would say it's necessary. That does not require you to take personal responsibility for the behavior of your ancestors. And I would say nobody expects you to. But we must take responsibility for our future. Our future as a society, our future as individuals. In Mormon society, this is plain more than it is in most parts of the country. We have a very racist past. And there is racism rampant in Mormon doctrine and in Mormon scripture. And I would put to you that God is and always has been a very convenient way to use racism to shield racist behavior and terminology and racist rhetoric, and clothe it in divinity and say, this isn't my opinion, it's God's opinion, where once again we find there are no God's opinions, there's human beings' opinions that they then enshrine and say, it can't, my opinion is not my opinion. It is the opinion of Almighty God, while disguising the plain fact that gods don't exist except as invented characters in the minds of human beings. We use gods to justify misogyny. We use gods to justify child abuse. We use gods to justify racism. We use gods to justify selfishness and greed, including some that we saw this week. I made a TikTok recently. This is just an aside, responding to Riley Gaines. I don't know if you know Riley Gaines, but I've been digging deep into Riley Gaines lately. May make an episode of Charlatans Never Change about her soon for Hellfire Agency. But this woman, she was not born racist. It doesn't seem to be anybody is. And she's not born a transphobe. I don't think anybody is. Just as we are all born atheists, we are all born not racist, not transphobes. But then somewhere along the way, when somebody feels weak, they turn and otherize those negative feelings. And it's so important for us to understand our feelings. You know, the first episode of Hellfire Agency I ever did, I decided I wanted to have an audible disclaimer. And so I read a disclaimer that I had written, and it was so boring. I said, I'm going to lose viewers right off the bat. People are going to be like, what is this? Boring, you know, and they're going to just either skip ahead or likely just click off of it and go on to something else. So I decided I'll just make it fun. I'll do something I've said for a long time I was going to do. So, and this is it. Okay. You know, I'm ExmoJoe. And one thing about me is I do voices. And one of the ones I do pretty well is the governor. In fact, I had people who thought that my disclaimer was made using samples of the governor's voice. And because I would tell them, you got to show me your leadership capabilities. Show me not just the strength of your muscles, but also of your mind. You got to show me the strength of your character. I do a decent governor. Decent. I won't say it's the best, but I've heard worse. A lot. And people think that I get people then when they hear my impersonation of the governor, I get people texting me or messaging me saying, wow, you must really be a fan of Arnold. And then send me some information about Arnold Schwarzenegger. And not really. I don't dislike him. He can be a real jerk. I remember when I heard that about the scandal of his cheating on his wife, I remember thinking, well, that just figures. I mean, but at the same time, I remember thinking, not that uncommon among celebrities, though, you know? It's just the bigger the celebrity is, the bigger the scandal is when they go out and do things that, frankly, just happen all the time all over our society. And we just don't like that mirror. We don't like it held up to ourselves that these are the kinds of things that happen. People have affairs, people cheat on each other, people hurt each other. And we like to idolize our celebrities like Arnold Schwarzenegger and say, well, he's supposed to be better. He's supposed to be the best of us. And without giving much attention to the fact that that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, frankly, money, wealth, and status tend to amplify toxic behaviors, not diminish them. And it mounts up pressure on these people. Not saying what he did was right. It's still wrong. But there are more things to him than just the wrong 1, 2, 3 wrong things we know about him. And this is one thing that I tell people, like, I'm not a fan of Arnold Schwarzenegger, to be honest with you. But there is something about him that I really like. And that was when I learned the story about his father. Maybe I can share a screen with you guys. I have it here. Share screen. Tab. No, 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 no. Never mind. Anyway, here, maybe I can upload an image. That's a new thing. Yes, I have the image. Okay, here we go. I'll show you something. Okay. The man you're looking at here is Gustav Schwarzenegger, who died on December 13th, 1972. He is the father of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And if you're looking at the image on the screen right now, you see why this is perhaps a shocking revelation for some people to know. Okay. The governor's father was a Nazi, and he was a police officer in Austria. He was an extremely abusive man. He used to pit Arnold and his brother against each other and tell them that he wanted to prove which of them was his real son or which one was the better son. There's some moments where Arnold seems to have suggested, I've heard this, that he has suggested in the past that his father even questioned his legitimacy, whether or not he was really his son. He would do these things. He'd play these games with his boys and be cruel with them, and in a philosophy that it would make them tougher, it would make them stronger. Both boys wound up being extremely physical, extremely aggressive, and they both got into bodybuilding. But Arnold's brother wound up giving up the bodybuilding, didn't take it very seriously. He gave it up and decided he was going to focus more on his mind. And his father really liked that, and that's how his brother became the favorite. And Gustav Schwarzenegger treated Arnold like he wasn't his real son, like he was the son he wasn't proud of. Apparently, his relationship with his mother was much different. And Arnold remained close to his mother all of her life. But and again, all of this is by his own reporting, which has shifted over the years. Now, on December 13th, 1972, when Arnold Schwarzenegger was competing in the bodybuilding world here in America, and his brother had already passed away. His brother stayed back in Austria, settled down, had a family, but unfortunately got drunk and got behind the wheel one day, and that was his last day. And Arnold eventually took on his son, who was just a baby at the time, Patrick Schwarzenegger, and basically raised him as part of his own family. And but then sometime later, his father, in 1972, his father passed away, and his mother had called Arnold and told him, "Your father's passed, and you need to come home for the funeral." And he tells the story about how it is that he came to tell her, "No, I won't do it." And he ended up not going home even for his father's funeral. He also didn't go home for his brother's funeral, which was around the same time. Now, I tell you this story to tell you this. So this is the evolution of that story. When he was young, Arnold Schwarzenegger told people that he didn't go home for his brother's funeral or for his father's funeral because he was so focused on competition that he wouldn't allow negativity into his mind, and grief was negativity. Sounds kind of dickish to me, but like this was the kind of thing. This is actually a kind of a thing among bodybuilders. Like they would say things like, "Oh, you shouldn't have sex while you're training because it weakens you or makes you, vulnerable, or you shouldn't get too close to a woman because she could break your heart, or you shouldn't get involved in." You should be prepared to lose anything. In fact, I saw this interview with him when he was young, where he said, "If you stole my car when I was in competition, if I walked outside and found someone who stole my car, I wouldn't even acknowledge it as real. I would say whatever and just move on with it, because there's no time. If you're going to be a champion," this is part of his lifelong thing about being a champion. If you're going to be a champion, you got to show that you're not going to let anything beat you. You got to be positive all the time. And so he says that that's the reason why he told his mother. He made up some excuse, but he said the real reason is that I was going for competition, and death of a family member or not, I was too cold-hearted to accept it, because that's what it takes to be a winner. That's what it takes to be the best. You know, Arnold Schwarzenegger's father didn't give him a start in his real career, the career that made him famous, for the thing he was passionate about, which was fitness and bodybuilding. His father used to beat him because he said, and to say, you think you're so tough, but you're just going to wind up a day laborer. You're going to wind up going out there and working on the docks, working in labor jobs, because you're not smart like your brother. You're stupid. That's why you do bodybuilding. And he was determined to not let his father's opinion shape his dream of becoming a bodybuilder, of getting big into fitness. But he also needed a job when he became an adult. And his father got him one in the Army as a tank driver, got him a good job to try and set him up in life. Even though he wasn't his father's favorite, his father tried to help him. He didn't want him tarnishing the family name, whatever the reason, or maybe he really did at his core, at some point level. Maybe his father, the Nazi, loved him. That's not a proud heritage to carry into the modern world in the 1960s, 1970s. His father got him a job as a tank driver in the Army, and he was grateful for it. But especially because his time in the Army meant that he got more opportunities to engage in fitness and to go to Germany and start his fitness career, start his bodybuilding career, which ultimately brought him to America. And you know the rest of the story, hopefully. Or became a movie star, action film star. And set him up for a career. Which includes, by the way, not my favorite thing about Arnold Schwarzenegger, is that he's a very staunch Republican, and he became a Republican governor of arguably the largest and most powerful state in the Union. And for many years, people talked about, including him, that frankly he'd make a good president, a good Republican president, and better Republican president than some of the ones we've had. And one notably that he has recently called out. In fact, he compared the January 6th event at one point to Kristallnacht, the night that Germany stormed Jewish-owned bookstores and stores all over the country, and used immigration policy to try to deport people who were Jewish for not being German enough. And the idea was that they were sold, that the Germans were sold on. And he says this in his interviews and speeches. He says, here's the thing. He says, people like my father, they were sold by a weak man. They were sold on that their weakness was not their own, that the Jews had weakened them, that homosexuals had weakened them, that indigenous Europeans had weakened their pure Aryan blood, and that the society would be better off if they could rid themselves of weak elements. The thing that the Reich didn't inform them, and that they didn't learn about until afterwards, was that included things like taking the autistic children to a hospital in Vienna where they were exterminated. The doctor who was in charge of sorting out which of those children could actually be saved from the extermination, by being conditioned using Pavlovian style conditioning to try and teach these autistic children to mask well enough that they could pass as neurotypical, was a man named Dr. Asperger. He is the person for whom Asperger's syndrome was named. This is a part of our culture. This is a part of our history as people, not just in Germany and Europe. It's here in America too. And if we cannot heal that generational wound, that hatred, it will just get worse. I'm going to bring this back home to me and to Nick Shirley. and to all these Mormon podcasters, including the Paul brothers, including the Greg Matsons, and all of us in the ex-Mormon community. This is true about most of us who grew up, from a pioneer legacy. We must heal this wound by choosing to say you can blame your ancestors, but you don't have to. You can do what I say, accept and love the sacrifice and legacy of your ancestors while separating out the hateful things they did and saying to yourself and to anybody else, I would encourage you to be prepared with this statement. I love this person. I love their story. I love what they did. And I am proud to be a part of to have their heritage. If you are not required to be, by the way, as we're going to see now with Arnold. You can separate it out and say, but this thing they did was wrong. This thing they did was hateful. This thing they did was born out of weakness. This thing that they did was born out of hate. It was born out of fear of God. It was, in many cases, it was born out of, or it was born out of just fear. And I choose not to live with that fear. I choose not to live with that otherization, with that marginalization. That was wrong that they did it, whatever the reason. Make any excuse you want. Those are all excuses, and I won't justify it. It was wrong, and it stops with me. And then you don't teach that to your children. If you don't teach them the hate. But when the children are old enough, and I've done this with my children, my parents did it with me. Other people, other people throughout the world will tell you the same story. Remembering of moments where their parents had told them about their history with slavery, or their history with anti-immigrant activity, or their history with the Reich in Germany, their history with with the oppression of people in Italy and in Spain. It was all over Latin. It's been all over Latin America. I can tell you that right now, and still is today. It's still perpetuated today. So this is a thing that we as people everywhere can heal by making sure that we recognize the generational wound here. That it doesn't matter that it's not fair. It's going to feel unfair to say, that's not how I feel about those people. Why should I take responsibility? You don't take responsibility for it. I'm going to put to you. You don't take responsibility for it. You put the responsibility where it belongs and recognize that the people who perpetuated it, the people who practiced it particularly, are gone now, if they are. And you can't change what they did any more than they can. And they definitely can't change what they did. But you can stop it from going into the future. And that's going to require being willing to say, I know that's about my family. I know this about my past. I can still love them. I can still love those people and not make excuses for why they did. As soon as it becomes, well, you don't understand. Back then, they did this and they did that and they did this. And we felt that, wait a minute, you're saying we there. Now you are taking responsibility. Now you are taking on that hate. And it's not necessary. You don't have to make an excuse. You don't have to perpetuate the excuse. You can let it go. You can let it lie down in the dust with them, because frankly, you got to be able at some point, probably the wisest thing maybe that Jesus said, I don't think this is what he meant it to, how he meant it to be taken, was that you have to let the dead bury the dead. He told that to his disciples, to tell them not to go home for a family member's funeral, which is what Arnold Schwarzenegger did. The original story he gave was that he was too cold-hearted because he was preparing for competition. Then later he came out with a different story, a story that was difficult. That the love he had for his father, and he did love his father, but that it grew cold when he was young, and his father used to hit him and used to shame him for his aspirations to become a bodybuilder, and used to favor his brother over him because his brother was going to become an intellectual and elevate the family name. Arnold Schwarzenegger grew up in a shanty with no running water, with no indoor plumbing, and his father. He would talk frequently about how his father used to drink to try and stifle and shove down and disguise the pain and guilt that he felt. That was, again, a collective psychological and spiritual wound on Germany that I think you could argue still lasts to this day, of men who were proud to call themselves more masculine and to believe in a divine masculinity that was connected to their heritage as Aryans, as the master race. And then they were defeated. They were defeated by people from all over the world. Woody Guthrie wrote a famous song at the time that was used to recruit Americans to the cause back in the day, when we forget this now. But one of the things that really was appealing about America in the 1940s was that, in spite of the Great Depression, Americans were banding together and using their political voice and using their collective voice to recognize labor, the labor movement. And this was attributed largely to socialism, and it was called socialism. And America at that time was seen as a democratic nation leaning towards socialism, and really the origins of some of the most celebrated figures in the socialist movement and in the labor movement all around the world are Americans. They're names of American people. And so at that time, it was expected at some point America would have to get into the war, because the Reich, we got to be careful what words we use. We definitely don't live under Big Brother. The Reich hated socialists. There's even a famous poem. I've mentioned it many times. It's one of my favorites. It's not really a poem. It's a piece of prose. Doesn't matter. By Martin Niemöller. First they came for the socialists, including the atheists. You guys know the story. Those who have been with me for a while, you know that I've talked a lot about Max Sievers, a man who nobody knows. He's a great atheist thinker from Germany who saved Germany and Austria's atheists from extermination, because the first group of people they came for were the socialists, and they knew most atheists in Germany and Austria were socialists. But Martin Niemöller, who was supportive of the Reich when they came to power, because he was a Christian preacher, and the Christian church in Germany, because of Martin Niemöller, eventually admitted their complicity, their guilt in the rise of Hitler. And he said, and this is the thing that he traveled around the world saying, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. When they came for me, there was no one left to speak for me. It was Max Sievers who stood up first and said, they're coming for us first. And by the time that the Reich came to Freethinkers Hall in Berlin to get the newsletter subscriptions of all the atheists and agnostics in Germany and Austria, they discovered that Max Sievers had taken them all and sent them away. And they arrested him and they tortured him to find out what happened to the records of these Austrian atheists and German atheists. And he didn't tell them. He wouldn't give it up. They had to release him because they couldn't get any information out of him. And he fled to Belgium and he fought against Hitler for the rest of his life until he was captured and executed by guillotine in 1945. One of the things I haven't mentioned in my past sermons about Max Sievers, by the way, was that Max was cellmates with a member of the Christian clergy who, like Martin Niemöller, had stood up against the Reich. And there was a quote. I wasn't planning to read this or tell you about this, so I don't have it pulled up word for word, I'm afraid. And the man said he had given an interview where he said, my last cellmate was Max Sievers, the chairman of the German Freethinkers League. And we would have long conversations into the night in this concentration camp while they were awaiting execution. Obviously, Max wasn't as lucky as he was. Max died in that camp, where he obviously survived. And he said that he was impressed with how brilliant Max Sievers was. I read on, and I promise I'm getting right back to this, and we're going to do this interview here. We're going to listen to this interview with Arnold here. It just irritates me every time I even think about it, and I can't help but mention it. There was discussion for a while among textbook writers, specifically on how unfair it was that Max Sievers was purposely omitted from history textbooks about World War II. And that he had been specifically removed through a concerted effort on the part of the corporate and political world, though nobody knows. I haven't heard exactly any names of any specific figures who were involved, but that they were pressured, these creators of these texts, to not include Max Sievers, not because he was an atheist, but because he was socialist, because he supported the Soviets, particularly, with no willingness to admit the fact that so did we. That was America. America. If you watch, there's that interview. I promise I'm getting back to the story here. There's this moment where Winston Churchill and Stalin and Roosevelt all met on an American battleship, American or British battleship, anyway, in the Channel, and they were talking. And Churchill was dismayed by how he felt like he'd brought Roosevelt and the Americans into the war. And while they were forming a new alliance, the Allied forces, to oppose Germany, and Roosevelt getting into the war, he knew that Roosevelt getting into the war would definitely spell the end of Hitler. And he wanted credit for it. And what he discovered was that Stalin and Roosevelt buddied up and started to turn the tables on him, saying, part of the problem here is British colonization. The United Kingdom is actually the British Empire still. And Churchill, who was very proud of the British Empire, believed that Britain was a force for good in the world, and that people of all races were made better by becoming subjects of the crown, or at least tributaries to the crown. And that this was a great legacy. And they said, this is the old world thinking that gave Hitler his power. This is what makes fascism popular, is this idea of imperialism. And so they had to negotiate with him that if America was going to get involved in the war, and the Soviet Union and the United States of America become allies, it was going to have to be because Britain had decided to give up its colonies. And that's ultimately what they did. That's the agreement they came to. We forget this because of propaganda, especially those of us who grew up during the Red Scare. In any event, it's in the midst of that Arnold Schwarzenegger became an icon in America in a time when the two dirtiest words in America you could utter were Nazi or socialist. And here's this man who was the son of a member of the Nazi Party, who he was not proud to associate with because his father was such an abusive jerk. And so when, even though he had originally said, I didn't want to go to my father's funeral because he was preparing for competition, he later came out with the truth, what I would argue is the truth. And then we're going to come out with yet another version of the story. I'm going to remove that. I'm going to bring in the interview. Yeah, I'm just going to bring in this interview. This is an interview that Arnold Schwarzenegger did.
To your dad, who was a Nazi officer, that Jews were responsible for bringing you to America and responsible for your success. How did he react?
I said, well, Reg Park, my idol, his mother was Jewish, and therefore he's Jewish. I said, when I got into the movies here, my first movie I did was Bob Raferson is a Jew. Mike Meadow, who got me the part in Stay Hungry, is a Jew. I said, the guy that had received me in Gold's Gym, he's a Jew. I said, so all of those guys that are helping me in America realize my dreams are Jewish. I said, so you should never ever talk about Jews that way. Right. You got to get off that. And he never ever talked about it badly again after that.
It's later since been suggested that the real reason why Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't go home for his brother's funeral or his father's funeral was that his visa had lapsed and he was an illegal. Very, very important to me as the descendant of Mexican Americans on my mother's side. I'm going to say this last piece, and then I'm going to play a closing hymn after the sermon that is very special to me and is very separate from this issue I just mentioned real quickly. Is a hymn that I wrote in dedication to my ex-wife. And I'm just showing you the Suno-generated video. You guys all know that I use AI to make all of our amazing hymns just because it's amazing and I can't sing very well. I wrote this one as a hymn for us. And that's because I'm just mentioning this real quickly in the middle of this because I don't want to stop to introduce it and tell you why. But, I've said from the beginning that we want to be the first church. This Godless church will be the one that celebrates divorce and celebrates that divorce is an opportunity for people to grow and not just a reason for people to feel like they have failed, but a reason to believe that a phase of your life has completed, and part of loving somebody else is letting them grow, even if it's growing away from you. And that's why I tell people all the time when they find out that I got divorced last month, and somebody wants to ask, what'd she do? What did she say? What's going on with that? And I say, I tell people all the time, please don't. I love her. She grew apart because she's growing into who she's becoming, and I'm growing into who I'm becoming, and growing up and becoming grown-ups, each of us as individuals, and accepting our individuality and learning to love ourselves as we are. Each of us as we are is not a failure. I'm the descendant of immigrants on both sides of my family. My father's family came from England and Sweden. My father's family were white Anglo-Saxon people who came to this country looking for a better life, for an opportunity. They joined up with the Mormon Church, bought into the Mormon Church's rhetoric, read the Book of Mormon, loved it, and after the murder of Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram, they went and joined up with Brigham Young and made the trek out west here to the plains in Utah. And here, Mormons engaged in a genocidal campaign against indigenous peoples that saw the ends of whole groups and bands of Shoshone Indians. They killed the Timpanogos, destroyed them. They displaced the Utes and the Paiutes. They pitted them against each other. They took them as slaves, took their children as slaves, and used the Book of Mormon all along. I didn't grow up in Utah, though my parents both did. And I grew up in Mesa, Arizona, which is we sometimes called Little Salt Lake. Right down, right on the same street where my first job home from my mission for the Mormon Church, there is there's a little hotel, which is now I think a Ramada Inn, but at the time it was a Best Western, on the corner of Main and Alma School Road. Alma School Road was named after Alma School, which is named after Alma, the prophet in the Book of Mormon, that Korihor loses to, the wicked Christian sorcerer who takes away Korihor's voice in the story that gives us the name of this godless church, the Church of Korihor. Alma was a missionary to the Lamanites. I want to show you something here, and I'm running over time. Hopefully, if Rene is in my other studio, she'll be patient with me. We are supposed to go live in 1 minute, but I want to share this with you because it's important to me. This is part of me standing up for what I believe. I'm going to share my screen here. Obviously, I wasn't planning to do this. Okay. This is on the website of the churchofjesuschrist.org now, still today in 2025. You guys see that okay? Yeah, I should be able to. This is 2 Nephi chapter 5. It starts, it says, "Behold, it came to pass that I, Nephi, did cry much unto the Lord my God because of the anger of my brethren. But behold, their anger did increase against me, insomuch that they did seek to take away my life. Yea, they did murmur against me, saying, Our younger brother thinks to rule over us, and we have had much trial because of him. Wherefore now let us slay him, that we may not be afflicted more because of his words. For behold, we will not have him to be our ruler. For it belongs unto us, who are the elder brethren, to rule over this people." Now, this is the story I set up for you guys to understand. This is the justification under which my ancestors and the ancestors of a lot of us who've come from the Mormon paradigm justified the genocide of indigenous Americans like those of my mother's family. Let me just forward down to there. Here we go. "And he had caused the cursing to come upon them." Let me just back up here. It says, "Wherefore the word of the Lord was fulfilled, which he spake unto me, saying, Inasmuch as they," that's the Lamanites, who are given to be the ancestors of indigenous Americans, Native Americans, "and inasmuch as they will not hearken unto my words, they shall be cut off from the presence of the Lord. And behold, they were cut off from his presence. And he had caused the cursing to come upon them, yea, even a sore cursing, because of their iniquity. For behold, they had hardened their hearts against him, that they had become like unto a flint. Wherefore, as they were white and exceedingly fair and delightsome, that they might not be enticing unto my people, the Lord God did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them. And thus saith the Lord God, I will cause that they shall be loathsome unto thy people, save they shall repent of their iniquities. And cursed shall be the seed of him that mixeth with their seed, for they shall be cursed even with the same cursing. And the Lord spake it, and it was done. And because of their cursing which was upon them, they did become an idle people, full of mischief and subtlety, and did seek in the wilderness for beasts of prey. And the Lord God said unto me, They shall be a scourge unto thy seed, to stir them up in remembrance of me. And inasmuch as they will not remember me, and hearken unto my words, they shall scourge them even unto destruction. It's racist. I'm not going to play for you any of the clips because I've run out of time and because I'm putting together Another episode of Charlatans Never Change this week about Nick Shirley and the Mormon podcasters who are now defending him. Some of whom are guys I actually kind of like. But this has rubbed me the wrong way, and I won't put up with it. I'm standing up. This is our shared heritage of hate as people from the Mormon paradigm. I don't hate my ancestors. I love them. My Mormon pioneer ancestors were brave people, came across the plains, who lost everything for their faith in God and their belief in Joseph Smith and in the Book of Mormon. And it was a hard life. They also didn't know what else to do. And most of them, my ancestors, didn't want anything to do with polygamy. There were some of those Mormons who didn't like it, didn't want anything to do with it. Don't get me wrong, they practiced it. Because my ancestor, Joseph Sharp Rollins, was told by the church that he had to practice it. And so he engaged in the practice, which drove his son, Joseph Lafayette Rollins, to grow hateful towards the church and become the man who's the politician that we don't speak about in the Rollins family because he opposed the church. But what he opposed was polygamy, and he opposed slavery. And he went to the government. He got elected and went to Washington. And he authored the Enabling Act and got it passed, fought hard to get it passed. Worked with Smoot and others to try and get this passed, and negotiated the end of polygamy in Utah, which still continued, but he negotiated the formal end of it and tried his best to negotiate the return and equalization about lands that were stolen from the Mormons back east in Missouri and Illinois and Ohio, New York. Did the best that he could to give Mormons a fair deal. But but if Mormons who at that time had a long rhetoric under Brigham Young that they were no longer Americans, that they had a different identity, that they were in the kingdom of God now, and that Brigham Young was a king. Joseph Smith had himself ordained as a king in the Council of 50. They were kings to rule over the people when Christ returns, which they were expecting to happen any day now. Remember that Joseph Smith predicted, I think it was in 1890, Christ would come back, and then after it didn't happen, that Mormons just stopped talking about it. And this is all part of our legacy. This is all part of where we come from. The racism was wrong. It was wrong. When people make excuses for it and say, well, you have to understand back then, blah, 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 or that kind of slavery wasn't real slavery, or this part, well, okay, but you have to understand that stop right there, okay? As long as we make an excuse for it, it perpetuates. And people hear it and remember it. Most significantly, our children hear it and remember it. I will not perpetuate that hate into another generation. I will not feel it in my heart. I will not shame my ancestors for being racist. But I also will identify that what they did was racist and it was hateful. And whatever the reasons, hate is hate. It's born out of weakness. On this, I don't know. I don't know what the true story of Arnold Schwarzenegger is. I don't know if anybody does, much less him. But obviously it's complicated. And it has to do with the shame that he felt about his father. Now I would put you this question before I close. Can you imagine if Arnold Schwarzenegger's father had been loving toward him? Racists are hateful people, but that doesn't mean that they don't love. A lot of racist people love their children. What if Arnold Schwarzenegger's father had treated him equal to his brother? What if Arnold Schwarzenegger had grown up thinking of his father as somebody who had been wronged by the Allies, as many Germans and Austrians did after the war? What if he had grown up thinking of his father as a great noble man who was just misunderstood? Would he have made excuses for the rest of his life? Would he have ever become an action movie star in Hollywood? Would he ever have become a legendary? Would he have ever been Mr. Olympia, Mr. Universe? Would he have ever been celebrated the world over in a world where to have been from a family of Nazis was just about the most shameful thing? Probably not. Probably not, honestly. Those of us who grew up in the Red Scare, those of us who grew up in a time when America was proud to have beaten Germany and Italy and Spain to an effect and Japan. Probably not, honestly. The fact that the son of a Nazi was able to become governor of the state of California is a real success story, regardless of whether we agree with the man's politics or ideas or not. Frankly, I agree with some of the things he did, and I agree with some of the things he says, but not all of them, not by a long shot. But this story inspires me. In a way, I hate to say that I'm glad that Arnold Schwarzenegger's father hurt him and hit him. I wouldn't be glad about that for any child. But I can tell you that I am glad that that painful thing, made him a better man. Gives me hope. We can all do better. We can move into the future without racism of the past. But can we take the gods that were used to justify it with us? Can we take the scripture that was used to justify it with us? Can we take the church that justified it with us? I put to you, no. I put to you, those were the excuses. God was the excuse for this hate. I move forward without the hate. That's why I move. That's partly why I move forward without the God that was used to excuse it and the scripture used to excuse it. And every time that a Mormon makes an excuse and says, well, what you don't understand about this, I understand exactly, but I understand it exactly because I know the history. I know the truth. Healing from this racism, healing from this hate, means letting the Book of Mormon lie down in the dust with the racist man who was its engineer, Joseph Smith. He was a hateful man. He did a hateful thing. Let it die with him. Let the dead bury the dead. Amen. I'm going to play this hymn for you. Then I'm going to switch over and see if Rene is in our other studio. And if she is, then we'll go live. And if she isn't, well, I'll probably briefly go live and share a few things with you guys either way. I told her, look, because it's been difficult to organize this last minute. I'm like, look, I'll go live. If you can jump in there, awesome. If not, it's totally chill, super chill. I'll just play you guys some of the things. I've been doing a lot of research for this week's Charlatans Never Change. So I'll probably just share things with you there. The description of that live, in the description of this video is a link to that live. And I hope to see you guys there. I'll go live either way. And we'll see if Rene joins us. We'll go live for about an hour. Kind of linger longer. And then I got to go to my day job. See you there, my friends. Otherwise, if this is where I lose you, you're welcome to join us on Tuesday for Charlatans Never Change. I usually go live after Latter Daily Digest is done, which is about usually 10 o'clock. Flash break.
Remember still in a church that I'd left, your mother's plastic ivy, your sister's borrowed dress, and goddess that I'd met only a few weeks before. And 2 decades later, I couldn't love her more. That maiden grew into a woman with my name, for the part I played. I won't ever be ashamed. What I want for you is to be yourself. May our precious years be treasured on the shelf. What I want for you is what I want for me. Let the girl I remember become who she's meant to be. We were only children, soon to have our own. I nearly lost you both, fear I'd never known. Fatherhood made me brave, added 2 children more. The maiden I had married became a mother I adored. She supported my dreams. Life had different plans, but her patience and love made me a better man. What I want for you is to be yourself. May our precious years be treasured on the shelf. What I want for you is what I want for me. Let the girl I remember become who she's meant to be. I won't hold you back, I cannot change for you. Tell that girl's story written in your truth. Don't think that I forgot your sister's borrowed gown, how I wept like a child as we swore those vows. I was privileged to watch you grow away from me. The person you'll become is who that girl was meant to be.